guys, welcome back. I hope you're all well. My name is Alan and this is Gryphon Studio. So this week I've been making a few interesting pieces of battlefield scatter terrain, mostly for things like gaslands style or Fallout style, 40k, kind of barren wasteland, interesting stuff. Things that can be both good to look at and useful to play with. So firstly, a kind of a barricade pipeline, and then also the interesting kind of toxic goop pool thing. So yeah, that's what I've been making. Let's get to it. Start with a base, shall we? I'm going to use a mixture of this Foamex and some XPS foam, and I'm just going to trim this up to be the right size as the base beneath it, or roughly the right size. I'm going to try and build up a little bit of land here, because creating depth on a predominantly 2D piece of terrain can sometimes be quite tricky. The only way you can really do it is to build up a little bit of height at first, and then kind of dig into it. So I'm just going to trim the various things that I need to trim, bevel the edges a little bit, and stick the XPS foam using hot glue to the base of Foamex. And as you can see, I cut out a small circle, irregular circle in the middle, and I'm just going to bevel the edge of the XPS foam so that it makes a nice transition into the secondary base beneath it. It's always quite handy to have quite a long knife for this, so I use a box cutter. And then I took some filler. This is just kind of standard joint compound type thing. You can just use your finger to smear this all over, or you can use some sort of spatula or spreader, coffee stirrer, something like that, to smooth out those transitions between the two different kinds of basing material. And I actually ended up smearing this stuff all over the foam just to protect it a little bit more from any sprays that I use later on. I took a piece of corner plastic piping just from some old plumbing, and I added that as a kind of an inlet pipe. And then I took an old Games Workshop barrel, cut it in half, because I don't like to waste pieces, so I just sliced it in half to use as two separate barrels. I wanted to add a little bit of a rocky outcrop here as well, so I used some plaster of Paris old rock formations that I'd previously made in another video, which I can link for you here, and I smushed them into a little bit more filler joint compound, and hopefully that created a little bit of a rocky outcrop. And then some good old PVA glue all around the edges. I'm going to entirely miss out the middle section though. And then some basing sand, just to give it a little bit of ground texture. Then I glued the barrels down to the middle. And I gave the whole thing a medium brown spray paint undercoat. Then I covered the pipe and the barrels in this Rhinox hide, which is just very dark brown, and the rocky outcrop got a burnt sienna base coat. And while the rhinox hide was still wet, I applied some burnt sienna to the pipe and tried to blend in, or sort of wet blend, some rusty undertones into this pipe, just to give it a little bit more character, I suppose, and a little bit more texture. And once that was dry, I took some masking fluid and I sponged it on the barrels. I wanted the barrels to be painted to have a little bit of colour to them, and this masking fluid is really good at creating nice rusting effects. So the idea is that you just kind of splodge it on in different places, and then once you have painted the surface, you can rub the masking fluid off with your finger. I decided to overpaint the rust on these barrels using a bit of a blue and some yellows as well, going over all of the masking fluid that has now dried. And once that paint had dried, you can just carefully peel off that masking fluid. It's quite satisfying, really. You can brush some off as well. If you have a bit of a stiff bristled brush, you can maybe use that instead to brush away some of the masking fluid, and it leaves behind a kind of a nice irregular rusty paint peeled effect. Now I wanted to paint the inside of this little pool in the middle here with a bit of green. This is just in case the resin isn't quite as opaque as I wanted it to be, so I used a kind of medium green in the middle and then followed by a lighter green around the outside, and I blended them together with a wet brush. And while the middle was still a little bit wet, I used a wet brush and blended in some kind of like a deep sea green blue colour, and that should really give the illusion of depth. And then I scuffed up some of those rusty parts with a little bit of bolt gun metal. That's just to reveal some of the fresh metal underneath all those rusty old bits of piping. I then dry brushed some of these rocks at the side here, this little rocky outcrop, using a kind of an ivory colour. Hopefully this would insinuate that the rocky surroundings were maybe a bit more of a desert-like rock, a bit of a red sandstone sort of feel. And I just went around the entire base with this this highlight and dry brushed all of the outside texture as well. And now time to add a little bit of life to this as well, so I put some PVA glue dabs in between the rocks and planted some small bits of static flock. I'm using a burnt yellow static flock for this because I wanted to have kind of a barren wasteland. I don't want it to be too lush, especially not near a kind of toxic pool of whatever this is. now time for a resin pot. This is the resin I'm using. This is a water clear epoxy 2-part resin. You mix this in 50-50 parts by volume, and you can add various things to it to tint the mixture. So here I've potted into a single cup, and I'm just going to stir it together very, very slowly, introducing as few bubbles as possible to the mixture. And then I added 2 drops of this green, this very light green paint. I think 1 drop would have been enough, to be fair. There's only a small amount of resin, and I think 2 drops was a little bit too many because it turned it very green very quick, and it ended up being quite opaque. I would have liked a little bit of a see-through appearance to this kind of toxic goop, but I just pot it on very carefully, ensuring that I miss the barrels and only pour it into the green pool beneath. And because this stuff self-levels, it does self-level quite slowly though, so I want to speed up that process and move it around a little bit so that it completely surrounds the barrels and fills out that little delve in the middle. And once that was completely dry, I added some gloss Mod Podge to the top using a paintbrush. And then used a good old-fashioned straw to blow in some ripples into the water. This just to give it a bit of a more of a realistic surface appearance. You know, liquids and goops and waters and things tend to have these little ripples on the surface, and it gets rid of any of those brush strokes and really evens out the gloss Mod Podge. And you could use an airbrush for this if you wanted to, but it's harder to control the PSI and it's much easier and quicker to use a straw. I figured while I was at it I would make one more piece as well, just to kind of match this little pool of goop, and I wanted to make a bit of a barricade system, and I'm going to use some pipes as barricades. So I made a little base out of a scrap piece of Formex. Remember, of course, you can use anything like some very thick card or MDF or whatever. I then found these pipes. These are kind of like toys for kids and stuff. They only go together in certain directions. But the possibilities are fairly endless with these, and they're really useful for just making interesting industrial terrain. So I glued some together into a kind of vague pipe shape, made sure it sit flush against the floor. And I found this piece of old toilet cistern. This is literally from the back of an old toilet, and yeah, I thought it had some really interesting texture and potentially quite useful for some sort of industrial build. Thankfully I held on to that and I can use it in this video. So I trimmed down a little bit of piping and applied it to the base and glued all these things in together. I then gave it the exact same paint job, but with the addition of a little bit extra riser rust from the Citadel range. This is kind of like a dry paint, and the idea is that you just sponge it all over and blend it in and really try and spread it out, and you get these variations in vibrancy of the orange, the kind of that rusty vibrant orange that comes through, and it blends nicely into the brown as well. Now, if it's not painfully obvious by now, I do really love doing rust on these industrial builds. I think it's a really good technique for someone like me to have, because I do collect orcs in 40k, and a lot of their equipment, you know, vehicles and weapons and such, are usually pretty rusty, and things like games like Gorkamorka have really helped me produce this kind of method that's really quick and easy and very effective, I think, at the end. And then I scuffed that up as well with a little bit of gunmetal, just to reveal a little bit of fresh metal underneath all that rust. And a couple of little blobs of PVA glue just dotted around the place. And then a few bits of burnt grass, dry grass or yellow grass, I guess, tufts here and there. So there we are, all finished. I am fairly pleased with the way these turned out. They are fairly useful in a wide variety of battlefields and things, a wide variety of games. And but I mean, I made them for me, and you know, and that's the thing about this channel, is I make things for me, my own hobby. And although this channel presents itself as a kind of like tutorial, this isn't really. That's not really the way it's intended. I'm really just making what I want to make, and then I'm showing you guys. It's certainly not necessarily the best way, certainly not the right way, and it's sometimes I'm really just using the tools at my own disposal, materials that I want to get rid of, things that are taking up space on my shelves, things that are just being sat in my bits box for a heck of a long time, like way too, like years. I'm talking like years in my bits box, and you know, these things, they all need to. I had plans in my head for all these bits, and I thought, you know, I'll save them for a rainy day for a really cool piece, and that's what this channel's all about. I mean, I've been holding on to these things for so long that this channel has now given me a chance to use them and to produce them, and for you guys really as well as myself. But I mean, I make things for my own games. Whether it be D&D or Warhammer or the old fantasy, Gorkamorka, Mordheim, all sorts of things like that. If you're into any of those games, let me know what your favourite is and what you love about the game, and hopefully I can maybe custom make something for maybe one viewer or something, and maybe tailor a build a little bit towards someone. That might be quite an interesting idea. That's it for this one though, I'm afraid. If you did enjoy this video, please feel free to like, comment and subscribe below. Ring the notification bell so you get updates for future videos, and share the video online if you want, and tell all your friends and stuff like that. I do have a Instagram set up if you want to check out my Instagram. I post updates and things from around the workshop there, the studio, and hopefully some of it's interesting, maybe. And I am also on Patreon if you'd like to support the channel financially. That is the best way to help me get more videos out to you guys. I'm really thankful to my current patrons there who are already signed up. Thank you so much for your support, and hopefully continued support, and hopefully anybody else who joins up as well. I'll be really thankful to all of you, and it really means a lot to me. So thanks very much. I'll see you again in the next video. Thanks for stopping by, and happy crafting.